Margaret Chen never believed in love at first sight until she locked eyes with a stranger across a crowded bookstore on an ordinary Tuesday afternoon. At 61, the successful corporate lawyer had resigned herself to a quiet life of work and solitude after her divorce 3 years prior. But when 46-year-old Emma Reeves, a vibrant photography teacher with an infectious laugh, accidentally knocked an entire shelf of books onto Margaret's designer shoes, something shifted in the universe. What began as an embarrassed apology became coffee, which became dinner, which became the most intense, transformative love affair of their lives. But when a 15-year age gap collides with judgmental colleagues, disapproving family members, and their own deeply buried insecurities about deserving happiness, can two women prove that the most powerful love stories begin not in youth, but in the courage to claim your truth, no matter how late? Margaret Chen stood in the psychology section of Brookline Books reading the back cover of a memoir about late life identity formation. At 61, she'd become the person she'd always pretended to be, a senior partner at Boston's most prestigious law firm, impeccably dressed in tailored suits, her silver-streaked black hair always perfectly styled. Only her therapist knew the truth, that beneath the polished exterior lived a woman who'd spent 4 decades in a loveless marriage, playing the role expected of her by her traditional Chinese-American family. The crash came without warning. Books tumbled from the shelf above, cascading down in a chaotic avalanche. Margaret looked up just in time to see a woman reaching for a top-shelf volume, her tote bag catching on the bracket and sending at least 20 hardcovers directly onto Margaret's $1,000 Louboutin heels. Oh my God, I am so sorry!" The woman scrambled down from the step stool, her face flushed with mortification. "I was trying to reach the Diane Arbus collection and I didn't realize my bag was... Are you hurt? Did any hit you?" Margaret opened her mouth to deliver the cold, dismissive response she typically reserved for people who disrupted her carefully ordered life. But then she actually looked at the woman, and the words died in her throat. She was beautiful in an unconventional way. Wild auburn hair barely contained in a messy bun, freckles scattered across her nose and cheeks, wearing paint-splattered jeans and a vintage band t-shirt that somehow looked perfectly put together. But it was her eyes that stopped Margaret cold. Warm hazel eyes filled with genuine concern, and something else Margaret couldn't quite identify. "I'm fine," Margaret heard herself say, her voice softer than intended. "Just startled." "Your shoes." The woman knelt down, examining Margaret's heels with obvious distress. "These are Louboutins. I just dropped probably $300 worth of hardcover books on $1,000 shoes. I'm the worst person alive." Margaret surprised herself by laughing, actually laughing, something she rarely did. "They're just shoes, and you clearly have good taste in photography books." The woman looked up from her crouched position, and their eyes met again. Margaret felt something electric pass between them, a recognition she couldn't name. "I'm Emma," the woman said, standing and extending her hand. "Emma Reeves, professional klutz and apparently a danger to expensive footwear." "Margaret Chen, lawyer, book lover, and apparently very fortunate that you have terrible aim." Margaret shook Emma's hand, noting how warm and strong it felt, how Emma held the contact just a beat longer than necessary. "Let me at least buy you coffee," Emma insisted. "It's the least I can do for assault by literature." Margaret should have declined. She had briefs to review, client calls to return, the carefully structured evening routine she'd maintained for 3 years since her divorce. But something about Emma's open, genuine smile made her want to deviate from the plan. "Coffee sounds lovely." They gathered the fallen books together, their hands occasionally brushing, each contact sending unexpected warmth through Margaret's body. At the cafe next door, they settled into a corner booth, and Margaret found herself doing something she never did, actually talking about herself. "So, corporate lawyer," Emma said, wrapping her hands around her cappuccino. "That sounds intense. Do you love it?" The question caught Margaret off guard. Most people asked if she was successful, how much she made, whether she'd worked on any famous cases. No one asked if she loved it. I'm good at it, Margaret said carefully. I've built a respected career over 35 years. That's not what I asked. Emma's directness was disarming. Do you love getting up every morning and going to work? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, then surprised herself with honesty. No, I don't think I ever did. It was what my parents wanted: stability, prestige, financial security. I became who they needed me to be. And who did you want to be? I wanted to write fiction, poetry, essays about the human experience. I had notebooks full of stories in college. Margaret laughed self-deprecatingly. Very impractical dreams for a first-generation immigrant's daughter. Emma's expression was thoughtful, sympathetic without being pitying. It's not too late, to write, I mean. I'm 61 years old, Emma. That ship has sailed. I'm 46, and I just started teaching photography full-time last year, after spending 20 years as a graphic designer for a corporation I hated. Emma leaned forward. My marriage ended, my kids went to college, and I looked at my life and realized I'd been living on autopilot. So I said screw it and became the person I always wanted to be. Best decision I ever made. Margaret studied Emma's face, the laugh lines around her eyes, the comf. Margaret changed outfits 5 times before settling on black pants and a silk blouse. Professional but not stuffy, elegant but not trying too hard. She felt absurdly nervous for a woman her age, like a teenager preparing for prom. Her daughter Jessica had called during the wardrobe crisis, and Margaret had surprised them both by confessing she had a date. A date? Mom, that's wonderful. What's his name? Margaret took a breath. Her name is Emma. The silence lasted only seconds but felt eternal. Then Jessica's voice came through, warm and supportive. Tell me about her. They talked for 30 minutes, Margaret describing how they'd met, how comfortable she felt with Emma, how she was finally living authentically. Jessica's acceptance brought tears to Margaret's eyes. Mom, I just want you to be happy. If Emma makes you happy, then I love her already. The restaurant Emma had chosen was intimate and unpretentious, the kind of place Margaret would never have picked for herself, but immediately loved. Emma was already seated, wearing a deep burgundy dress that made her hair glow copper in the candlelight. You look beautiful, Emma said, standing to greet Margaret with a kiss on the cheek that lingered just long enough to feel intentional. So do you. Margaret slid into the booth, hyper-aware of how close Emma sat beside her rather than across from her. They ordered wine and talked easily, the conversation flowing as naturally as breathing. Emma told stories about her photography students, making Margaret laugh with impressions of the earnest teenagers trying to find their artistic voice. Margaret found herself sharing stories about difficult clients and courtroom victories, surprised by how invested Emma seemed in the details of her work. Can I ask you something? Margaret said during dessert. Yesterday, when I told you about being attracted to women, did you already know? Could you tell? Emma smiled. I suspected. There was something about the way you looked at me, the way you held my hand. But more than that, I felt it, this pull between us. I've felt it with women before, and it's different than anything I've experienced with men. How is it different? With men, I always felt like I was performing a role, being the woman they wanted me to be. With women, I feel seen, known, like I can breathe fully. Emma's hand found Margaret's under the table. How do you feel right now? Margaret considered the question honestly. Terrified, exhilarated, more alive than I felt in decades. Good, Emma said softly. That's how you're supposed to feel? After dinner, they walked through Boston Common, the autumn air crisp around them. Emma slipped her hand into Margaret's, and Margaret felt the significance of that simple gesture. They were 2 women, clearly on a date, visible to anyone who cared to look. Are you okay with this? Emma asked, noticing Margaret's slight tension. Holding hands in public? I'm trying to be, Margaret admitted. I spent 61 years hiding. It's hard to suddenly be visible. We can go slower if you need to. Margaret stopped walking, turning to face Emma. No, I don't want to go slower. I've already wasted too much time. Emma smiled, reaching up to tuck a strand of hair behind Margaret's ear. Can I kiss you? Instead of answering, Margaret closed the distance between them, pressing her lips to Emma's in a kiss that was tentative at first, then deeper as confidence built. Emma's lips were soft, warm, tasting of wine and chocolate and possibility. Margaret felt something unlock in her chest, a door she'd kept firmly shut for 6 decades finally opening. When they broke apart, both were breathing harder. Wow, Emma whispered. That was perfect, Margaret finished. Absolutely perfect. They went back to Margaret's apartment, a sleek, modern space in Back Bay that reflected Margaret's public persona, but revealed nothing of her private self. Margaret suddenly felt self-conscious about the sterile environment. It's not very personal, she apologized. I've never been good at making spaces feel like home. Emma walked through the rooms slowly, studying everything. It's beautiful, but you're right. It doesn't feel like you. It feels like what you think you should be. And what do I feel like to you? Emma turned to face her. Warm, complex, someone with deep emotions carefully controlled, someone who loves beautiful things but has denied herself permission to enjoy them. The accuracy of the assessment took Margaret's breath away. You see too much. I see exactly enough, Emma said, moving closer. Margaret, can I ask you something? Anything. Have you ever been with a woman? Physically, I mean? Margaret felt heat rise in her cheeks. No, only in my imagination, which felt like betrayal, even though I hated my marriage. Emma's expression was tender. Then we'll take this at whatever pace feels right to you. There's no rush, no pressure, no expectations. But Margaret surprised. 3 months into their relationship, Margaret found herself living a double life. At work, she remained the formidable senior partner Chen, tailored suits, controlled demeanor, no personal details shared. But the moment she left the office, she transformed into someone she barely recognized. A woman in love, laughing freely, holding hands with her girlfriend in public, staying up late talking about everything and nothing. Emma had slowly, gently pushed Margaret toward authenticity. They went to LGBTQ+ events together, had dinner with Emma's openly gay friends, spent weekends at Emma's cluttered plant-filled apartment that felt more like home than anywhere Margaret had ever lived. You should move some things into my place, Emma suggested one Sunday morning as they lay in her bed, sunlight streaming through the windows. A toothbrush, some clothes. Make it feel like yours, too. Margaret's heart raced at the suggestion, the domesticity of it, the visibility. Emma, too fast? No, perfect, just scary. Everything worth having is scary, Emma said, kissing Margaret's shoulder. But I think you're ready to be a little bit braver. The test came unexpectedly at a firm function, a retirement party for one of the founding partners. Margaret had attended dozens of these events alone over the years, making polite conversation, leaving early. But this time, Emma had encouraged her to bring a date. You don't have to introduce me as your girlfriend, Emma had said. Just bring me as your +1. Let yourself be seen with someone who makes you happy. Margaret had agonized over the decision for days before finally, terrifyingly, saying yes. Emma looked stunning in a navy dress that was elegant enough for the formal event but still maintained her artistic edge. As they entered the hotel ballroom together, Margaret felt dozens of eyes turned toward them, the curiosity palpable. Margaret. Thomas Caldwell, one of her fellow partners, approached with his wife. So glad you could make it. And who is this? Margaret felt her throat constrict with fear, but then Emma's hand found hers, squeezing gently. The touch gave her courage. This is Emma Reeves, my girlfriend. The word felt both foreign and natural on her tongue. Thomas's eyebrows rose slightly, but his smile remained genuine. Wonderful to meet you, Emma. How did you two meet? Emma launched into the story of the bookstore disaster, making everyone laugh with her self-deprecating humor. Soon, a small group had gathered, charmed by Emma's warmth and authenticity. Margaret watched in amazement as Emma navigated the crowd of buttoned-up lawyers and their spouses, making everyone feel comfortable and engaged. She's lovely, Thomas said quietly to Margaret during a moment alone. I'm happy for you, Margaret. We've all worried about you being alone these past few years. You're not bothered by the fact that she's a woman? That she's younger? Thomas looked genuinely confused. Why would I be? You're clearly happier than I've ever seen you. That's what matters. Not everyone was as accepting. Sarah Kim, a junior partner known for her conservative views, made pointed comments about alternative lifestyles and appropriate professional boundaries. But Margaret found she cared less than she'd expected. Holding Emma's hand, she felt protected by love in a way she'd never experienced. The real test came when Margaret's mother called unexpectedly, saying she was in Boston for the weekend and wanted to have dinner. Margaret had been avoiding this conversation for months, but time had run out. You should meet her, Emma said when Margaret confessed her terror. I know it's scary, but she's your mother. Don't you want to share this part of your life with her? My mother is 79 years old and very traditional. This could destroy our relationship. Or it could free you from carrying the secret. Margaret, you can't control how she reacts. You can only control whether you're honest. The dinner took place at a quiet Chinese restaurant in Chinatown. Margaret's mother, Helen Chen, arrived dressed impeccably as always, her silver hair perfectly styled, her expression neutral and assessing. Ma, Margaret began in Mandarin, then switched to English. I want you to meet someone important to me. This is Emma Reeves. We're together, dating. Helen studied Emma with sharp, intelligent eyes, taking in everything, the age difference, the casual, artsy style, the obvious affection between them. The silence stretched painfully. Finally, Helen spoke. You're younger than my daughter. Yes, ma'am, Emma said respectfully. By 15 years. And you're a woman. I am. Helen turned to Margaret, speaking in rapid Mandarin. Is this why your marriage failed? Have you been lying to me for 40 years? Margaret answered in English, wanting Emma to understand. Yes and no. I loved David as much as I could, but I was never fully present in our marriage. I didn't. 8 months after their bookstore collision, Emma asked Margaret to move in with her. They were having breakfast at their favorite cafe when Emma slid a key across the table. Move in with me, Emma said simply. I know your place is bigger and fancier, but mine has plants and terrible art, and it actually feels like a home. Let's make it our home. Margaret looked at the key, brass, ordinary, representing everything she'd ever wanted and been too afraid to ask for. Yes. Really? Just like that? Just like that. I've wasted enough time being careful, Emma. I want to build a life with you. They spent the next month combining households, Margaret's sleek, modern furniture mixing surprisingly well with Emma's bohemian chaos. Margaret contributed her extensive book collection, Emma added more plants than any apartment could reasonably hold, and together they created a space that felt like both of them. Margaret's daughter Jessica visited during the move, immediately embracing Emma and complimenting their design choices. Mom, I've never seen you this relaxed. It's like you're a completely different person. I'm the person I always was underneath, Margaret corrected. I just finally have permission to show her. The commitment ceremony took place in the Community Arts Center where Emma taught, surrounded by Emma's photography students, Margaret's colleagues who'd become genuine friends, and both their families. Margaret's mother attended, sitting stiffly at first, but softening as she watched her daughter's obvious joy. Margaret wore a tailored ivory suit. Emma chose a flowing champagne dress, and both had flowers in their hair. Emma's idea, which Margaret had initially resisted, then embraced completely. Margaret Chen, Emma began when it was time for vows. You walked into my life disguised as a stern lawyer with expensive shoes and perfect posture, but underneath all that armor was the most tender, passionate, courageous person I've ever met. You've taught me that it's never too late to become who you're meant to be. You've shown me that love doesn't follow timelines or rules, it just is. I promise to love you through every season of our lives, to support your dreams, to make you laugh every single day, and to remind you constantly how extraordinary you are. Margaret had written her vows on note cards but found she didn't need them. Emma Reeves, you crashed into my life literally and figuratively. You took one look at my carefully constructed walls and decided they were ridiculous. You've made me braver than I knew I could be. You've taught me that joy isn't frivolous, it's essential. You've shown me what it means to be truly seen and loved for exactly who I am. I promise to choose courage over fear, authenticity over performance, and you over everything else. For whatever time we have together, I'm yours completely. They exchanged rings, simple platinum bands engraved with the date they met, and sealed their promises with a kiss that made several guests cry. At the reception, Margaret danced with Emma to Etta James, not caring who was watching or what they thought. Her mother approached during a slow song, tapping Margaret's shoulder. "May I?" Helen asked. Emma graciously stepped aside, and Margaret found herself slow dancing with her mother for the first time since she was a child. "I don't fully understand this life you've chosen," Helen said quietly, "but I see how happy you are. I see how Emma looks at you like you hung the moon. That is all a mother can hope for her daughter." Margaret hugged her mother tightly, tears streaming down her face. "Thank you, Ma. That means everything." The honeymoon was 2 weeks in Portugal, wandering through Lisbon's cobblestone streets, eating fresh seafood in coastal villages, making love in their hotel room with the windows open to the sound of the ocean. Margaret felt young again, or perhaps truly young for the first time, experiencing joy without the weight of secrets. "What are you thinking?" Emma asked one evening as they watched the sunset from their balcony. "That I spent 61 years preparing for a life I never wanted, and 8 months building a life I can't imagine living without. Any regrets?" Margaret considered the question seriously. "I regret the wasted time, the years I could have spent being authentic, but I don't regret the journey that brought me to you. I needed to become the person who was ready to love you fully." 5 years later, Margaret retired from law and published her first novel, a story about a woman discovering her truth in her 60s. Emma's photography series, Late Bloomers, had been featured in galleries across the country, including a prominent exhibition in New York where Margaret's portrait was the centerpiece. They'd become advocates for LGBTQ+ elders, speaking at conferences about the unique challenges of coming out later in life. Margaret used her legal expertise to help LGBTQ+ seniors with estate planning and discrimination. Margaret and Emma's story proves that the greatest loves often come when we finally have the courage to be ourselves. At 61 and 46, they chose bravery over fear, authenticity over performance, and love over societal expectations. Their 15-year age gap became irrelevant in the face of genuine connection, mutual respect, and passionate devotion. They didn't just fall in love, they became the people they were always meant to be.